The wooden sign bounced against little Tommy's chest as he struggled against the rough rope that held him to the hitching post. His small hands had gone numb hours ago, but his eyes still burned with the same fire that had gotten him into this mess in the first place. It was 1876 in the Dakota Territory, and 8-year-old Tommy Mackenzie had nowhere left to go. The general store behind him buzzed with activity as settlers came and went, but nobody looked at the boy tied up like a wild animal. Well, nobody except to read the cruel words carved into the wooden board hanging around his neck. Bites, free to good home. Tommy's story didn't start here, though it felt like his whole life had been leading to this moment of shame. Just 2 years earlier, he had been a different boy entirely. Back then, he lived in a small cabin with his ma and pa on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. His father worked as a blacksmith, and his mother took in washing from the other families. They weren't rich, but they had each other, and that felt like everything to young Tommy. But then came the fever. First his pa got sick, then his ma. Tommy watched helplessly as the typhoid took them both within a week. He was only 6 years old, sitting alone in that cabin, waiting for someone to tell him what would happen next. The first family that took him in was the Johnsons. Mrs. Johnson meant well, but she already had 4 children of her own and barely enough food to go around. Tommy tried to be good, really he did. But when the other kids would push him around or take his small portion of food, something inside him would snap. He'd fight back the only way a small, scared boy knew how. The first time he bit Billy Johnson, it was because the older boy had shoved him into the mud and laughed. Tommy's teeth found Billy's arm, and suddenly everyone was screaming. Mr. Johnson whipped Tommy with a leather belt that night, telling him that wild animals bite, not civilized boys, but Tommy didn't feel civilized. He felt lost and angry and scared all the time. Every night he'd dream of his ma's gentle voice and his pa's strong hands, then wake up to remember they were gone forever. After 3 months, the Johnsons decided they couldn't handle him anymore. They passed him along to the Millers, a childless couple who thought they wanted a boy to help with their farm work. Tommy hoped things would be different this time. For a few weeks they were. Mr. Miller taught him how to milk cows and feed chickens. Mrs. Miller made decent food and didn't seem to mind when Tommy accidentally spilled things or forgot his chores. But Tommy had learned not to trust kindness. He waited for the punishment, the disappointment, the moment when they'd decide he wasn't worth the trouble. That moment came when Mr. Miller lost his temper over a broken tool. He grabbed Tommy by the shoulders and shook him hard, yelling about careless, worthless boys who couldn't do anything right. Something in Tommy's mind went back to that cabin, to being helpless and alone. He bit down hard on Mr. Miller's hand. The Millers kept him for 2 more months, but things were never the same. They started calling him that biting boy and would warn visitors to stay away from him. Tommy felt like a monster, but he didn't know how to stop being one. The third family was the Hendersons, and they were the worst of all. Mr. Henderson believed in discipline above all else. Any small mistake meant a beating. Any sign of defiance meant going to bed hungry. Tommy learned to keep his head down and his mouth shut, but the anger inside him grew bigger every day. The Henderson boy, Peter, seemed to know exactly how to make Tommy's life miserable. He'd break things and blame Tommy, steal Tommy's few possessions, and push him around when the adults weren't watching. Tommy endured it for months, biting his tongue instead of fighting back. But one morning, Peter went too far. He found Tommy's only treasure, a small wooden horse his pa had carved for him, and threw it into the fire, laughing as it burned. Something inside Tommy broke completely. He threw himself at Peter with all the rage of 2 years of suffering. When Mr. Henderson pulled them apart, Peter's arm was bleeding from bite marks, and Tommy was screaming like a wild thing. The beating that followed was the worst Tommy had ever received. Mr. Henderson used a wooden board and didn't stop until Tommy couldn't stand up anymore. That night, Tommy heard the adults talking in hushed voices. Mrs. Henderson was crying, saying she couldn't take it anymore. Mr. Henderson's voice was cold and final. "He's not right in the head," he said. "No decent family will ever want a boy who bites. We've done our Christian duty, but enough is enough." The next morning they dragged Tommy out of bed before dawn. His whole body ached from the beating, but they didn't seem to care. Mr. Henderson had carved a wooden sign during the night, and the words on it made Tommy's stomach twist with shame and fear. They walked him to the general store in the center of town, where everyone could see. Mr. Henderson tied the rope around Tommy's small wrists, then looped it around the wooden post. The sign went over his head like a collar. "Someone will want you eventually," Mr. Henderson said, but his voice held no kindness. "Maybe someone who needs a guard dog more than a boy." And then they left him there. The first day was the hardest. People stared and whispered. Some children threw small stones when their parents weren't looking. A few adults shook their heads sadly, but nobody stepped forward to help. Tommy learned that shame could hurt worse than any beating. The store owner, Mr. Crawford, brought him a cup of water when the sun got high, but he wouldn't meet Tommy's eyes. "I'm sorry, boy," he muttered, "but I can't untie you. Henderson made me promise to leave you be until someone claims you." Night fell, and Tommy was still there. The temperature dropped, and he had no blanket. His stomach cramped with hunger, but all he got were scraps, a half-eaten biscuit from Mrs. Patterson, some bacon rind from the hotel cook. He felt like a stray dog begging for mercy. By the second day, fewer people bothered to look at him. He had become part of the scenery, like the hitching post itself. Tommy's spirit should have been broken by then. Any normal child would have been sobbing, begging for forgiveness, promising to be good if someone would just take him home, but Tommy wasn't broken. The anger that had gotten him into this mess was still there, burning in his chest like a small fire. He stared back at anyone who looked at him, his jaw set with determination. He wouldn't cry, he wouldn't beg. If they wanted to treat him like a wild animal, then that's what he'd be. He didn't know it then, but those burning eyes would soon catch the attention of someone who understood exactly what it meant to fight for survival. Someone who could see past the crude sign to the brave heart beating underneath. The morning mist was just lifting from the ground when War Chief Standing Bear rode into Pine Ridge with 5 of his warriors. The Lakota leader sat tall on his painted horse, his weathered face showing no emotion as the townspeople stopped their morning routines to stare. Some mothers pulled their children closer. Shop owners stepped back into their doorways. Everyone knew who he was. Standing Bear was here on business, not war. The recent treaty allowed for peaceful trading during certain times of the year, and his people needed supplies before the harsh winter set in. His pack horses carried buffalo hides, beadwork, and other goods that the white settlers valued. It should have been a simple transaction, but nothing was ever simple when 2 different worlds tried to meet as his horse walked slowly down the main street. Standing Bear's sharp eyes took in everything. He had learned long ago that survival meant watching, listening, and understanding what others missed. That's how he spotted the small figure tied to the post outside Crawford's general store. At first, he thought it might be a bundle of rags or supplies left outside. But as he rode closer, he realized it was a child. A white child, no more than 8 or 9 years old, with tangled brown hair and clothes that had seen better days. The boy was awake, staring straight ahead with eyes that reminded Standing Bear of a trapped wolf, but it was the wooden sign around the boy's neck that made Standing Bear stop his horse completely. He couldn't read the English words, but he understood the situation well enough. This child had been abandoned by his own people. Standing Bear dismounted and walked closer. The boy's head turned toward him, and their eyes met. Most white children would have been terrified to see a Lakota warrior approaching, but this one just stared back with that same fierce look. No fear, no begging, just pure defiance. "Why is the small one tied like a dog?" Standing Bear asked in his broken English, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. Mr. Crawford hurried out of his store, wiping his hands on his apron nervously. "Oh, that's just Tommy Mackenzie, Chief. He's got problems." "But geez. People, you see. The Henderson family couldn't handle him anymore." Standing Bear studied the boy more carefully. Tommy was thin, too thin, and there were dark circles under his eyes. His wrists were raw from the rope, and his lips were cracked from thirst, but those eyes still held fire. "How long?" Standing Bear asked. 2 days now, Crawford admitted, looking uncomfortable. Someone will take him eventually, maybe. Standing Bear knew that tone. It was the same way white soldiers talked about unwanted horses before they shot them. He walked closer to Tommy, close enough to see the words on the sign. He couldn't read them, but he could guess their meaning. Tommy watched the tall Indian warrior approach and felt something strange. This man wasn't looking at him with disgust or pity like everyone else. He was looking at him like he was seeing something important. Standing Bear knelt down in front of Tommy, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. Up close, he could see the intelligence behind the anger, the hurt behind the defiance. This reminded him of his own childhood, of being misunderstood by adults who feared what they couldn't control. "You bite?" Standing Bear asked quietly, pointing to the sign. Tommy lifted his chin proudly. "When I have to—" Something in the boy's voice, the way he didn't apologize or make excuses, made Standing Bear smile slightly. In his own language, he said to his warriors, "This one has the heart of a fighter." One of the younger warriors, Gray Fox, rode closer. "Why do you care about the white boy's troubles?" Standing Bear stood up slowly, still looking at Tommy. "Because I know what it means to be called dangerous when you are only trying to survive." The crowd had grown larger now. People whispered among themselves, wondering what the Indian chief wanted with the problem child. Some worried he might cause trouble over how Tommy was being treated. Standing Bear walked back to Crawford. "I will speak with my people," he said carefully. "We return tomorrow." That evening in the Lakota camp set up outside town, Standing Bear sat with the tribal elders around the fire. The flames danced as he told them about the white boy tied like an animal in the settlement. "The boy has been abandoned by his own kind," Standing Bear explained. "He fights because he has no one to protect him. They call him dangerous, but I see a young warrior who has lost his way." Old woman singing, the eldest of their group, shook her head. "Taking a white child would bring trouble from the soldiers. They will say we stole him." "They have already thrown him away," Standing Bear replied. "How can you steal something that has been discarded?" Gray Fox disagreed strongly. "Our children already struggle with having enough food for winter. Why add another mouth to feed, especially a white boy who may never truly belong with us?" But Standing Bear's wife, Gentle Rain, had been quiet during the discussion. Finally she spoke. "I have seen that child in my dreams for 3 nights running. In my dreams he becomes a bridge between our people and theirs. Sometimes the spirits speak through the most unexpected messengers." The debate continued long into the night. Some saw only problems in taking Tommy, others worried about what the soldiers might do. But Standing Bear felt something deeper pulling at him. "When I was young," he said finally, "my own father died in battle. I was angry at everyone, fought with other boys constantly. The elders could have sent me away or treated me like a threat. Instead, they saw past my anger to the pain underneath. They gave me purpose, taught me to use my fighting spirit to protect others instead of just lashing out." He looked around the circle at each face. "This boy reminds me of myself at that age. Maybe the Great Spirit has put him in our path for a reason." The next morning, Standing Bear returned to the settlement alone. Tommy was still tied to the post, but he looked weaker. Someone had given him water, but his body was starting to fail from exposure and hunger. Standing Bear approached Crawford directly. "I will take the boy." Crawford looked shocked. "Take him? You mean adopt him? He needs a family. My people understand children who fight when they are afraid." "But Chief, he's white. He's got problems. He bites." Standing Bear looked over at Tommy, who was listening to every word despite his weakness. "All young animals bite when they are cornered and scared. When they feel safe, they learn other ways to protect themselves." The negotiation took most of the morning. Crawford was worried about legal problems, but eventually admitted that no one else was likely to claim Tommy. The Henderson family had made it clear. They wanted nothing more to do with him. When Standing Bear finally cut the ropes binding Tommy's wrists, the boy rubbed the circulation back into his hands but said nothing. He watched as this strange man who spoke broken English and wore different clothes freed him from 2 days of shame and hunger. Standing Bear offered Tommy water from his own water pouch and dried meat from his saddlebags. As the boy ate hungrily, Standing Bear said, "You come with me now. My people will teach you different ways to be strong." Tommy looked up at him with those fierce eyes that had first caught Standing Bear's attention. "Why?" he asked as simply. Standing Bear thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because sometimes the spirits send us exactly what we need, even when it looks like trouble." As they rode away from Pine Ridge together, Tommy sitting in front of Standing Bear on the big horse, neither of them knew they were beginning a journey that would change both of their worlds forever. The Lakota camp looked nothing like anything Tommy had ever seen before. As Standing Bear's horse crested the hill overlooking the valley, Tommy's eyes widened at the sight of dozens of white teepees arranged in a large circle. Smoke rose from cooking fires, children ran between the dwellings, and horses grazed peacefully in the distance. It looked like a completely different world, but as they rode down into the camp, Tommy noticed something that made his stomach twist with familiar dread. People were staring at him. Women stopped their work to look. Men paused their conversations. Children pointed and whispered to each other. The attention felt just like it had back in Pine Ridge, and Tommy's body tensed up automatically, standing. Bear felt the boy stiffen in front of him on the horse. "They look because you are new," he said quietly. "Not because you are bad?" Tommy wanted to believe him, but he had learned not to trust adult promises. Still, something about Standing Bear's calm voice made him feel a little safer. When they reached Standing Bear's teepee, Gentle Rain came out to meet them. She was a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and long black hair decorated with small beads. She looked at Tommy for a long moment, then said something in Lakota to her husband. "She says you look like you need food and rest," Standing Bear translated. "She will take care of you now." Tommy climbed down from the horse on shaky legs. The last 2 days had taken more out of him than he wanted to admit. Gentle Rain approached him slowly, the way someone might approach a frightened animal. She knelt down and gently touched his face, examining the bruises and cuts he had collected over the past few months. She spoke softly in Lakota, her voice full of sympathy. Standing Bear translated again. "She says the people who hurt you were foolish. She sees strength in you, not danger." For the first time in months, Tommy felt tears threatening to come. He blinked them back quickly, but Gentle Rain seemed to understand anyway. She led him into the teepee, where a warm fire crackled in the center, and the smell of cooking food made his mouth water. The inside of the teepee was cozy and organized. Buffalo robes covered the ground, and various tools and decorations hung from the walls. It felt more like a real home than anywhere Tommy had lived since his parents died. Gentle Rain brought him a bowl of stew made with meat and wild vegetables. It tasted different from anything he had eaten before, but it was warm and filling. As he ate, she worked on cleaning his wounds with gentle hands and soft cloths dipped in herb-scented water. "She is a healer," Standing Bear explained, sitting cross-legged near the fire. "She knows how to fix bodies and hearts that have been hurt." That first night, Tommy slept on soft furs near the fire. He kept waking up, expecting to find himself back on the street tied to that post. But each time he opened his eyes, he was still in the warm teepee with people who had chosen to help him. The next morning brought his first real challenge. Gentle Rain tried to communicate with him using hand gestures and simple English words, but Tommy didn't understand most of what she wanted. When she tried to help him wash and put on clean clothes, he jerked away from her touch. "No," he said sharply, backing against the teepee wall. The sudden movement and sharp tone made Gentle Rain step back, concern filling her face. Standing Bear, who had been preparing his weapons for a hunting trip, looked up. "What troubles you, small warrior?" She was touching me," Tommy said, his voice shaking. "People who touch me always hurt me after." Standing Bear set down his bow and came over to kneel beside Tommy. Gentle Rain heals with her hands. "She touches to help, not to hurt, but she will not touch you if you do not wish it." He spoke to his wife in Lakota, and she nodded understanding. From then on, she showed Tommy what she wanted to do before doing it, giving him time to decide if he was comfortable. Learning the language proved to be Tommy's biggest struggle. Everything sounded so different from English. When people spoke to him, he could only stare blankly, feeling stupid and frustrated. The Lakota children, curious about the white boy in their camp, would sometimes try to include him in their games. But Tommy couldn't understand the rules or what they wanted from him. One afternoon, a group of boys around his age approached him. While he sat alone outside the teepee, they spoke rapidly in Lakota, gesturing for him to come with them. Tommy shook his head, not understanding. One of the boys, frustrated by the communication barrier, grabbed Tommy's arm to pull him along. The familiar feeling of being grabbed and forced to do something triggered every defense Tommy had learned. He spun around and bit down hard on the boy's wrist, just like he had done so many times before. The boy screamed and jumped back, clutching his bleeding wrist. The other children scattered, shouting in alarm. Within moments, adults came running from all directions, including Standing Bear and Gentle Rain. Tommy stood in the middle of the commotion, breathing hard, his teeth still bared like a cornered animal. He knew what came next. This was always when the beatings started, when people decided he was too much trouble to keep around. But instead of raising his hand to strike, Standing Bear knelt down in front of Tommy. "Why did you bite Swift Runner?" he asked calmly. "He grabbed me," Tommy said defensively. "I don't like being grabbed." Standing Bear nodded thoughtfully, then spoke to Swift Runner in Lakota. The injured boy looked surprised, then ashamed. Standing Bear turned back to Tommy. "Swift Runner did not know that grabbing frightens you. In his excitement to include you in the game, he forgot that you come from a place where touching meant danger. He apologizes." Tommy looked confused. No adult had ever explained his behavior in a way that made sense before. They just called him bad and punished him. "But I hurt him," Tommy said quietly. "Yes, you did. And now you must make it right. But first, you must understand why you bit him so you can choose a different way next time." Over the following weeks, Standing Bear spent time each day teaching Tommy not just Lakota words, but Lakota ways of thinking. He explained that among his people, children were guided, not beaten. When someone made a mistake, the focus was on learning from it, not on punishment. In the white world, you learned to bite because it was the only way to make people stop hurting you, Standing Bear said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Here, you can use words. You can say no and people will listen. You can ask for help and people will give it." Tommy struggled to believe this. He had learned that adults said one thing but did another, that kindness always came with a price. But as days passed, he began to see that Standing Bear and Gentle Rain were different. When he accidentally knocked over a pot of water, Gentle Rain just smiled and helped him clean it up. When he couldn't remember a Lakota word and got frustrated, Standing Bear patiently repeated it until Tommy got it right. When nightmares about his past made him wake up crying, they comforted him without asking questions he wasn't ready to answer. Slowly, very slowly, Tommy began to relax. He started picking up more Lakota words and phrases. He learned to help with simple camp chores. He even began to smile occasionally, something he hadn't done since his parents died, but the outside world wasn't ready to leave him alone. One day, while Tommy was learning to help Gentle Rain gather herbs near the river, they spotted dust clouds on the horizon. Riders were approaching the camp fast. "Soldiers," Gentle Rain whispered, grabbing Tommy's hand. For the first time since he had arrived, Tommy saw fear in her eyes dot as they hurried back to camp. Tommy realized that his presence here might bring the same kind of trouble he had always brought everywhere else. The difference was, this time he actually cared about the people who might get hurt because of him. The riders turned out to be government agents, not soldiers, but their message was just as threatening. Word had reached the territorial authorities that the Lakota had taken a white child. They demanded Tommy's immediate return to proper civilization. Standing Bear listened to their demands with a stone face, but Tommy could see the tension in his shoulders. After the agents left with warnings about consequences for kidnapping, the camp fell unusually quiet. That night, Tommy lay awake listening to the adults discuss his situation in hushed tones around the dying fire. He couldn't understand all the words, but he understood the worry in their voices. Once again, he was causing problems for people who had tried to help him, but this time, instead of just accepting that he was cursed to bring trouble wherever he went, Tommy made a decision. He would learn everything he could about being Lakota, and he would prove that he belonged here, not just for himself, but for the people who had given him the first real home he had known since his parents died. 4 years had changed everything about Tommy Mackenzie. Now 12 years old and known throughout the Lakota camp as Fierce Cub, he could ride a horse as well as any warrior, speak Lakota as fluently as English, and track animals through the wilderness with skills that impressed even the experienced hunters. His body had grown strong from years of outdoor life, and his face had lost the haunted look that had marked him as a broken child. But some things never fully heal. Tommy still flinched when strangers reached toward him too quickly. He still had nightmares about being tied to that post in Pine Ridge, and he still carried the deep knowledge that the world could turn cruel without warning. The morning that changed everything started like any other. Tommy was helping Standing Bear prepare for a hunting trip when Swift Runner came galloping into camp on his horse, shouting in Lakota. Tommy understood every word now, and what he heard made his blood turn cold. "Blue coats, coming fast!" Many of them, with wagons. Standing Bear's face went grim. He had been expecting this day for months. The government agents had been making more frequent visits, each time with stronger demands for Tommy's return. Now it seemed they had decided to take him by force. "How many?" Standing Bear asked. 20 soldiers, maybe more. "And men in suits? They have papers." Tommy felt that old familiar panic rising in his chest, the same feeling he had gotten every time he was passed from one family to another, never knowing if the next place would be better or worse. But this time was different. This time he wasn't just afraid for himself. "They'll hurt the camp because of me," he said quietly to Standing Bear, "just like I always hurt everyone who tries to help me." Standing Bear placed a strong hand on Tommy's shoulder. "You have brought nothing but joy to our people, Fierce Cub. The soldiers come because they do not understand that a person can belong in more than one world." Within the hour, the soldiers arrived in a cloud of dust and jingling harnesses. Their leader was a stern-faced captain named Morrison, accompanied by 2 government officials in dark suits. They rode right into the center of camp as if they owned it, ignoring the fact that they were uninvited guests. "We're here for the Mackenzie boy," Captain Morrison announced loudly. "We know you're harboring him, and it ends today." Standing Bear stepped forward, his bearing proud and unafraid despite being outnumbered. "The boy you speak of lives here by choice. He is my son now." One of the officials, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses, pulled out a stack of papers. "This child was illegally taken from civilized society. He belongs in a proper school where he can learn Christian values and useful skills, not running wild with savages." The word hung in the air like a slap. Tommy felt anger flare up inside him, the same rage that had gotten him in so much trouble as a small child. But now he had learned to control it, to think before acting. "I can speak for myself," Tommy said, stepping out from behind Standing Bear. His English was still perfect, though he now spoke it with the confident bearing he had learned from his Lakota family. Captain Morrison looked surprised. He had expected to find a wild child, probably unable even to communicate properly. Instead, he saw a healthy, articulate young man who carried himself with quiet dignity. "Son, you've been living in barbaric conditions," the captain said, his voice taking on what he probably thought was a kindly tone. "These people have filled your head with heathen nonsense. You belong with your own kind, getting a proper education." "My own kind abandoned me," Tommy replied calmly. "These people saved me." The thin official stepped forward impatiently. "Regardless of sentimental attachments, the law is clear. You're a white child and you belong in white civilization. We have orders to bring you back. And if I refuse to go?" Captain Morrison's face hardened. "Then we'll take you by force. And anyone who tries to stop us will be arrested for interfering with federal agents." Tommy felt the weight of impossible choices crushing down on him. If he went quietly, he would. lose the only real family he had ever known. But if he resisted, these soldiers might hurt Standing Bear, Gentle Rain, and everyone else in the camp. The people who had given him everything might pay the price for his presence. That night, the soldiers made camp nearby, clearly intending to wait out any resistance. They had given the Lakota until morning to hand over the boy voluntarily or face the consequences. Tommy sat by the fire in Standing Bear's teepee, staring into the flames. Gentle Rain worked quietly on some beadwork, but he could see the worry in her eyes. Standing Bear sharpened his knife with slow, methodical strokes, his face revealing nothing. "I should go with them," Tommy said finally. "I don't want anyone to get hurt because of me." Standing Bear looked up from his knife. "Is that what you truly want, or is that your fear talking?" Tommy was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know anymore. I thought I belonged here, but maybe they're right. Maybe I really am just a white boy playing at being Lakota." Gentle Rain set down her beadwork and moved to sit beside him. "In Lakota," she said, "the color of your skin does not determine the color of your heart. You have learned our ways not because you had to, but because you chose to. That makes you more truly Lakota than many who were born to it. But what if they arrest everyone? What if people get killed fighting over me?" Standing Bear finished, sharpening his knife, and set it aside. "Tomorrow, I will ask you to make a choice, Fierce Cub, not the choice between staying or going, but the choice of who you truly are inside. When you know that answer, the rest will become clear." The next morning came too soon. Tommy woke before dawn, his stomach churning with anxiety. He had barely slept, his mind spinning with all the possible outcomes of the day ahead. None of them seemed good. As the sun rose, Captain Morrison and his men approached the camp again. This time they brought chains. "We're done negotiating," the captain announced. "Produce the boy now, or we start making arrests." Tommy emerged from the teepee, dressed in his Lakota clothes but carrying a small bundle of his few possessions. The soldiers seemed relieved that he was cooperating, but Standing Bear looked deeply into his eyes. "Are you certain of your choice, my son?" Tommy nodded, though his heart was breaking. "I won't let them hurt my people because of me." But as he walked toward the soldiers, something unexpected happened. Swift Runner, the boy Tommy had bitten during his first week in camp, stepped in front of him. Then another young warrior joined Swift Runner. Then another. Soon a line of Lakota men, women, and even children had formed between Tommy and the soldiers. They stood silently, their faces resolute, creating a human barrier. "Stand aside," Captain Morrison shouted. "This is federal business." But nobody moved. Old woman singing, the eldest of the camp, spoke in a voice that carried clearly across the morning air. "This boy chose us, and we have chosen him. He is Lakota now, not by blood but by heart. You cannot take a person's heart by force." Tommy stared at the wall of people protecting him, people who were willing to risk arrest or worse for his sake. In that moment, he understood what Standing Bear had meant about knowing who he truly was. He wasn't the unwanted, biting child who had been tied to a post in Pine Ridge. He wasn't just a white boy playing at being Indian. He was Fierce Cub, son of Standing Bear and Gentle Rain, member of the Lakota people, and someone worth protecting. The standoff continued for hours, neither side willing to back down. But as the sun climbed higher, Tommy began to see a third option, one that nobody had considered. Maybe the choice wasn't between his two worlds. Maybe it was time to build a bridge between them. Tommy stepped forward through the protective line of his Lakota family, but instead of walking toward the soldiers, he positioned himself exactly halfway between the two groups. The morning sun cast his shadow across the dusty ground, creating a dark line that seemed to divide two different worlds. "Captain Morrison," he said clearly, his voice carrying the confidence Standing Bear had taught him. "Before you take me anywhere, I want to ask you something. Do you know why I bite people?" The captain looked confused by the question. "Because you disturbed. That's why you need proper schooling and Christian discipline." Tommy shook his head. "I bit people because I was scared and hurt and nobody ever listened to me, but these people listened. They taught me that there are better ways to be strong. He turned to address both groups at once, switching between English and Lakota so everyone could understand. For 4 years I've lived in both worlds. I know what the white world offers, and I know what the Lakota world offers. What if I told you that both sides are wrong about each other? The thin official with the wire glasses scoffed. A child's naive observations hardly matter in affairs of state. Maybe not, Tommy replied, but a translator's observations might. That word, translator, seemed to catch Captain Morrison's attention. The military was always struggling with communication problems when dealing with native tribes. Misunderstandings led to conflicts, and conflicts led to bloodshed that nobody really wanted. You speak both languages fluently? The captain asked. More than that, Tommy said. I understand both ways of thinking. I know why white people fear the Lakota, and I know why the Lakota distrust white people. Most of the time, both sides are afraid of the same things, but they don't know how to talk about it. Standing Bear had been watching his adopted son with growing pride, but now he stepped forward. Fierce Cub speaks truth. Many times, soldiers come here angry because they believe lies about us. Many times, my people prepare for war because they believe lies about soldiers. What if someone could help both sides hear the truth? Over the next hour, something remarkable happened. Instead of a forced arrest, Tommy found himself mediating an impromptu discussion between the soldiers and the Lakota leaders. When Captain Morrison complained about savage raids on innocent settlers, Tommy was able to explain that most of those raids were actually young warriors acting without tribal approval, trying to prove their bravery. When Standing Bear spoke about broken treaties and stolen land, Tommy helped the soldiers understand that the Lakota weren't naturally violent. They were defending their families from what they saw as an invasion. I've lived in white towns, Tommy told the soldiers. I've seen how people there are afraid of losing their farms and their children. But I've also lived here, and I've seen that the Lakota are afraid of the exact same things. The difference is just in how they talk about those fears. The thin official was growing impatient with all the talking. This is very touching, but it doesn't change the legal situation. The boy belongs in a proper school. What if he could get a proper education and still maintain ties to both communities? Captain Morrison asked suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him in surprise. I've been dealing with translation problems for 5 years. Good interpreters are worth their weight in gold, and this boy seems to have a natural talent for it. Tommy felt his heart racing. Was the captain actually suggesting a compromise? There's a new government school being established in Rapid City, Morrison continued. It's designed to educate both white and Indian children together, preparing them to work in the modern world while respecting their cultural backgrounds. The boy could attend school there and serve as a cultural liaison. Standing Bear frowned. And he would be free to return here? During school breaks, yes. And eventually, when he's older, he could work officially as a translator and mediator between our peoples. It wasn't perfect, but it was something Tommy had never dared hope for, a way to honor both sides of his identity without having to choose between them. The negotiations continued for most of the day. There were documents to sign, agreements to make, and concerns to address from both sides. Some of the soldiers grumbled about coddling savages, while some of the Lakota worried about letting the white world have any claim on Tommy, but by evening, a deal had been reached. Tommy would spend the school year in Rapid City, learning not just regular subjects but also formal training in translation and diplomacy. During summers and holidays, he would return to the Lakota camp. Most importantly, he would serve as an official cultural ambassador, helping prevent the kind of misunderstandings that led to violence. That night, as the soldiers prepared to leave, the next morning, Tommy sat with Standing Bear and Gentle Rain around their fire one last time. The sadness of parting was mixed with excitement about the future, but also with deep uncertainty about what lay ahead. I'm scared, Tommy admitted. What if I'm not good enough? What if I can't really make things better between our peoples? Standing Bear smiled and placed his hand on Tommy's shoulder. Do you remember the first day you came here when you bit Swift Runner? Tommy nodded, embarrassed by the memory. You thought your anger made you dangerous and unwanted. But that same fierce spirit that made you bite when you were cornered is what will make you brave enough to stand between two worlds and speak truth to both. Your greatest weakness became your greatest strength. Gentle Rain added, the spirits gave you a hard path because they knew you were strong enough to walk it. Now you will help others find easier paths than the one you had to travel. Over the following years, Tommy proved them right. At the school in Rapid City, he excelled not just in his studies, but in helping other students from different backgrounds understand each other. When conflicts arose between white and Indian students, Tommy was often the one who could explain each side to the other. More importantly, his work as a translator began preventing serious conflicts. When misunderstandings arose between military patrols and Lakota hunting parties, Tommy could explain cultural differences that others missed. When treaty negotiations stalled over language barriers, Tommy could find words that both sides understood. By the time he turned 18, Tommy had become known throughout the territory as someone who could bridge the gap between two very different worlds. Government officials sought his advice on Indian affairs, while tribal leaders trusted him to represent their interests fairly, but his greatest achievement came when he established a school of his own, a place where children from both cultures could learn together, understanding that being different didn't mean being enemies. The school taught traditional white subjects like reading and mathematics, but also Lakota history, customs, and values. Standing Bear, now growing old, visited the school often. He would sit in the back of the classroom, watching his adopted son teach children to see past their differences to their common humanity. You have become exactly what I saw in you that first day, he told Tommy one afternoon as they watched white and Lakota children playing together in the schoolyard. A warrior who fights not with weapons but with understanding. Tommy smiled, remembering the angry, frightened boy who had been tied to a post with a sign around his neck. That boy had thought he was broken, unwanted, destined to bring trouble wherever he went. But Standing Bear had seen something else, a bridge between worlds. Waiting to be built, the sign had said, "Bites," marking him as dangerous. But the old war chief had looked deeper and seen a boy who would one day help heal the wounds between two peoples, teaching them that understanding was stronger than fear, and that sometimes the most unlikely person could become exactly what the world needed most.